Today's flip video is going to cover the Indian civilizations that emerge out of the Indus Valley and also then move into India and control the entire peninsula for several hundred years. So classical, or in other words, ancient India, is going to begin in the Indus River, ancient India, which is actually, while a little bit confusing, it's actually Pakistan, right? Because it actually comes right here, and the modern India border is more something like this. I know that's not a great drawing, but so the Indus River here is where civilization begins, and then it spreads along the Ganges and throughout the rest of the Indian subcontinent. Because geographically they are separated here by the mountains to the north and really all the way around the peninsula, northwest all the way to the northeast, the Indian subcontinent develops its cultures distinctly separate from that of, say, the Middle East or Asia proper. So that's what this is saying about the physical barriers. Those physical barriers, the Himalayas here and the Hindu Kush mountains here, are going to make it difficult for people to invade because there's really a very few specific passes, in particular the Khyber, which I'm not even going to pretend that I can write correctly with my mouse. Khyber Pass is going to allow for migration, but then it's also very easily defendable in that situation. So the Indus and the Ganges are two very distinct, very specific places that those rivers, those civilizations will move out of. Of course, just like every other civilization we've talked about in this unit, you've got the fertile soil helping with irrigation and distribution of crops so that you can add surpluses and therefore your culture can grow. So two famous cities in the Indus Valley, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Harappa is to the north, Mohenjo-daro is further south on the Indus River. Both have evidence of fairly significant plumbing and sewer systems that are very well detailed. Mohenjo-daro is the one that the Great Bath is in, that we talk about in our Ancient Artifacts activity, and that John Green talks about in his video. That seems to be very spiritual in nature. So the Indo-Aryans, which are not to be confused with the Aryans that, like, say, Adolf Hitler discussed. The Indo-Aryans are a semi-nomadic group, so they do move around, but they also are herders. So you could do this with, like, say, sheep, where you can keep track of your sheep, but then you can also travel along and graze them on the grassland. Are going to migrate from India out of this southern Europe section here. So the early Indo-Europeans are here, and then the Aryans actually came from around the Caspian Sea. So that Adolf Hitler German concept of what an Aryan would be is exceptionally false, because he really wanted people to be German. He really wanted people to be Northern European, not Middle Eastern, for really is where the Aryans are, along the area along the Caspian and Southern Asia. That's a very distinct difference. As they move, they're going to blend their cultural beliefs with those of the indigenous people living in India at the time to create what we consider now modern Indian culture. So they moved here along the Hindu Kush, right? They moved through the Hindu Kush, through Khyber Pass, and because they had this stronger military, they are able to dominate the culture, and they actually create this system called the caste system. We'll talk specifically more about the caste system as we cover Hinduism as a religion, and it's a little bit more on that next slide. But this is going to dominate the culture, and basically it was a way for the Indo-Aryans to keep themselves in control, because the Aryans made themselves the top of the social class system, and according to reincarnation, you can't become the top without dying and being reborn. So the caste system, you have priests, you have the wealth, you have the power at the top, right? Then you have warriors, you have merchants, you have farmers, and then you have the untouchables. So the untouchables is the lowest social class. They were called that because they were seen to be unclean. They were given jobs that were considered dirty. People who, for instance, worked in slaughterhouses or who were responsible for keeping the streets clean of dead animals and that sort of thing are all going to be untouchables. The way that Hindu untouchable caste system works, is that when you die, your soul is then reborn into another being as it is being born, and your thoughts, your deeds, your actions are all summed up to determine which level of society you were born into. So you start here in the Sudra. That's where every new soul begins, and then as your karmic cycles continue, you can rise up a level and then up another level. Or if you had a lifetime where you had a lot of bad karma, you could go down a level, right, and just have to start all over. This cycle continues, this karmic cycle of rebirth and reincarnation, rebirth, until ultimately you live a perfect life outside of the Brahmin class and you are released back to join the universal spirit. And again, we'll talk much more about that when we talk specifically about Hinduism, and that's going to be an in-class conversation. So one group that we have to know are the Mauryans. The Mauryans come into control after the Indo-Aryans, about 300 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, about 1,800 years ago or so. It's established by a man named Chandragupta Maurya in the 300s, where he creates a bureaucratic government just like the Persians. So remember we talked about in the Persian video, we talked about bureaucracies being levels of government, dividing government, splitting up positions. So he gives different people, he delegates different jobs to different people in order to be more effective. His grandson is Asoka, and Asoka obviously is very well off. He's an emperor's son, he's an emperor's grandson. He actually converts from Hinduism to Buddhism, and it's under Asoka that religious tolerance becomes more important in India 1,800 years ago. And also he sends missionaries, he pays for missionaries to go out and to spread the message of Siddhartha Gautama, spread the message of Buddhism all throughout China. So it's really Asoka's missionaries that are spreading Buddhism throughout Asia. The Gupta come in after the Mauryans. So if you can see on this map, the Mauryans are 250 BC and the Gupta are actually 400 CE. So you're talking a span of a couple of hundred years, a handful of centuries afterwards. And they make major scientific and cultural contributions to the world during their golden age. So a golden age is a flourishing of culture, a renaissance, to use a word borrowed from European history and American history. It's a time period where there are major scientific and cultural contributions, major times of peace and cultural building that happen sort of all throughout history. We'll talk about several golden ages, the Indian, the Greek golden age. We'll actually talk about the Roman, called the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, but it's also a golden age. So they come up with the concept of zero and how to use that mathematically. They are the first to come up with pi, which has to do with how you can compute circles in math. They are strong into the setting of bones. So if you broke a bone in your body, they figured out how to reset and then cast and let it heal, so that you've got people who are no longer permanently crippled for breaking bones. They are the first to scientifically theorize that the world would be round. And this was in the 300s and the 400s CE. This was 1,200 years ago. These people are coming up with this math. They also do a lot of textile work, a lot of cloth, a lot of dyeing of cloth and printing of beautiful, beautiful scenes from India. That cloth then becomes, for hundreds of years, very valuable. You're still actually talking about the textile trade in India when you cross into World History 2 class and you're talking about the Mughals who were in control of India in the 1500s. Indian cloth Indian textiles are very, very valuable throughout history. They also have a lot of literature. We talked about the epic poem of Gilgamesh that comes out of the Middle East. They also have a couple of epic poems that happen in the golden age of the Gupta Empire. We also have two major texts for Hinduism, the Vedas and the Upanishads, that are long stories of the gods that are also going to emerge out of India, and all of these things are part of this literature push that happens during the golden age. Make sure you have all of your notes written down. Make sure that you answer any questions. Send me any questions if you have any. And I'll see you later.